Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk about Danny Masterson. Okay, today on the date of this video, a California court sentenced Danny Masterson to 30 years to life imprisonment, okay, for two counts where he was found guilty of R. R means, aggravated sexual penetration, okay? And it's a very interesting case because Danny Masterson is an actor. He was on the '70s show and he's pretty high profile, but it's also very controversial because he is at least loosely connected with Scientology. I don't think Danny Masterson is really like a big time Scientologist. I think he's probably just a Scientologist kind of in name only, kind of like Republican in name only. He's a Scientologist in name only, but his family is heavily connected to the Church of Scientology. And so Scientology has policies where they really try to protect people from seeing like full consequences in criminal actions, because it kind of goes against their policy and their beliefs for people to be subjected to criminal punishment. Okay, so this has been a very controversial case, and Scientology has taken lots of efforts to kind of obstruct, the kind of obstruct the justice. I think in this criminal case, and now he was convicted of two counts of R, basically, heart, aggravated sexual penetration, basically, but. But he was actually charged with three, and I think it's kind of well known, or it's sort of suspected, that he was involved in a lot of other incidents, and that he is kind of abusive around sex, and that he has used alcohol and I think even drugs to sort of disable people and sort of render them at least partially unconscious, so that he could enjoy kind of not a very healthy form of sex with people. Okay, so this is a person who has a lot of problems. I'm going to go ahead and say that I think he does deserve prison. Okay, because I think it's fair, and I think this guy probably does have cluster B issues. Okay, I don't know if he's a straight up narcissist. I don't know if he's a little bit psychopathic. Probably what's fair to say is he may have traits of all these things and may not fall into any one bucket or one basket, but it's bad enough just to have traits. And the way I look at cluster B and the way I look at narcissism and addictions and all that, I basically just look at it as a continuum, and basically the fundamental issue to me in all narcissism and all psychopathy and all addictions is basically people who have a fundamental inability to face the core discomforts of living a responsible life. Okay, and that starts from childhood, because even as a child, there is kind of a strange responsibility, even when we're children, as a human being. Do we kind of accept and take on sort of the realities of our situation? The reality for a small child just may be just the basic realities of just any life, just having maybe family problems, maybe just the difficulties of going to school, maybe the difficulties of relating to other people. But the bottom line is that life presents a lot of discomforts and a lot of challenges, and there are some people from an early age who just aren't very good at taking on the ugly parts of life, the parts of life that are uncomfortable, the discomforts of life. Okay, and people who sort of routinely kind of avoid the uncomfortable parts and kind of favor the comfortable parts. Okay, if that gets bad enough, that can even distort the way we think, because reality sometimes presents us with unappetizing, not very nice things to think about. And if we're so avoidant of discomfort in life, we can sort of slip into other ways of thinking where we start to even kind of alter the way we think of ourselves and think of situations. We might become even pathologically optimistic, about how we evaluate ourselves and situations, or just kind of avoidant of a full analysis of reality because we just can't handle discomfort. Okay, and if that gets bad enough, it can actually result in what we see in narcissism, or what we see in other behavior issues. When a person cannot deal with the discomfort of their present realities, okay, just the discomforts, that can result in behavior issues. Because, for example, what's a classic example of discomfort for a person with sexual issues? Okay, let's say that I have, let's say, sexual desires or sexual feelings or whatever. If I can't sort of come to Jesus, and if I can't sort of accept that I have sexual issues that may have ramifications in the world, or even let's say the issue of watching too much pornography. The bottom line is that when someone watches a lot of pornography, the main thing they're doing is they're wasting a lot of time. Okay. And the fact is that that is a real issue in life. Okay. And if you can't deal with the sort of the uncomfortable part of, I have my sexual issues, I have my sexual desires, but the fact is that, I may enjoy this pornography, but I'm wasting, first of all, a lot of time. And secondly, it kind of has a way of sort of separating you from, living in the real world. Well, if a person can't deal with not the not the pleasurable part of it, but the part of it that's problematic, like how much time am I wasting? Is this really a constructive activity? Do I have other things I need to be doing? If you can't deal with the uncomfortable aspect of that, of the realities of one's sexuality, okay, what can happen is that we sort of lose integration of that part of ourselves, and it sort of slides off to become almost like a satellite, and it's not really part of our central personhood. Okay. I've talked about this in other videos, but basically, people who don't have the ability to deal with frustration and discomforts in life, and they haven't adapted to that, they can fall into all sorts of what I believe are, sort of the cluster B issues, the borderlines, the narcissism, the antisocial. At least in my opinion, I think the inability to tolerate the discomforts of our authentic place in life, I think it has a lot to do with how these disorders, arise basically for people. But I also think that those of us who fall more into the addiction spectrum, I think it also comes from a similar place. Difficulty in dealing with the uncomfortable aspects of just living a life. Okay, so whether Danny has come to this through addictions, maybe too much alcohol, and basically getting into that addictive cycle of relying on alcohol to deal with his issues. Okay, and that may have the effect indirectly of sort of not allowing his sexuality and maybe his aggression to sort of get integrated into his central personhood, so that he can have a little more mature processing of those things, and they're not sort of like dissociated out as satellites. Because the more a part of us becomes a satellite to our central personhood, the less control we're going to have over it. And what'll happen is that, let's say when people get drunk or when people get in a bad mood or whatever, they're not really in full control of those aspects, and they're sort of like dissociated. Okay, so at least that's kind of the way I look at it. But basically, it's very clear that Danny has a lot of aggression, and he has issues with sexuality. Basically, there's nothing wrong with having, let's say, very energetic sexuality, or let's say even mixing aggression with sexuality, because, sexuality does have an aggressive aspect. But when it's all integrated into a person, and a person can sort of take the whole reality of their sexuality, and just live with even the uncomfortable aspects of having, let's say, I'm a human being, but I have sort of like a beast in me. Like there's a part of me that's like a savage, how do I deal with the strain and the discomfort of having those two things be together in me at the same time? A person who can deal with a lot of strain and a lot of dissonance, okay, can sort of handle that conflict and even the discomfort of it. And over time, you metabolize that, and it sort of integrates everything into the central personhood. And you just have a lot more control, and it's more regulated. But I think for a lot of people who just happen to be, let's say, have a problem with alcohol abuse or drugs or other things, that's probably a sign that in life in general, they're just not very comfortable. They're just not very adapted to living with discomforts and sort of processing the uncomfortable aspects and conflicts inside their psychology. So I'm assuming that because it's pretty clear from what I've heard that Danny Masterson has a lot of alcohol dependency. I'm assuming that he has not developed a mature way of sort of living with discomfort and tolerating discomfort. And so, because sexuality does present a lot of discomfort just in holding it. Okay, I think probably a lot of his sexuality has gotten kind of fragmented and dissociated out as sort of like a satellite, and it's not really integrated into his central personhood. And so that's a classic recipe to end up having maybe not so much control around sex. So if he happens to have aggression in his sexuality, it's going to be unintegrated. And so naturally that's going to be more dangerous, more hard to control. And so in this case, he was developing patterns that were sort of typical, sort of a paradigmatic of, let's say, kind of committing rape. And at times he would commit, sexual crimes, basically. So, there's no question that he deserves prison. Okay. The question is, what is prison going to be like for him? Okay. Because a lot of people, I think, are kind of sensationalizing this. And I think a lot of people really want him to suffer, and they kind of imagine he'll be like in a kind of a high security gen pop situation where he'll basically just be around murderers, and people will just be gang members, and he'll just be like living in terror for the rest of his life. Well, I kind of look at it a different way. I have a background as a lawyer, okay, and I have worked in criminal defense for more than 10 years now. Before that, I used to work just in commercial litigation. But in the last, actually in the last like 12 years, I've worked in criminal defense, both at the appellate level, the trial level, and at the federal level, and also the state level, at least in Florida cases. But I've also done a lot of federal criminal defense litigation. Okay, so when I look at this case, just based on the cases that I've seen myself personally, this is a high profile prisoner. Okay, he's a high profile defendant, high profile prisoner. And I think physically, and even in terms of his health, he's a person who's been dealing with a lot of alcohol withdrawal, from what I understand. He's had a lot of health issues. I think he's basically been hospitalized in the Los Angeles jail, basically. And so I think he'll have a profile for the corrections as kind of a medical case, and also maybe a very sensitive case because of his VIP status. He's a high profile prisoner. And I think also, even though the sexual crimes that he was convicted of did involve violence, that is true. But generally in his life, he has not been like a dangerous person. Okay, he's not a person who just like breaks windows and goes and like commits road rage, or like starts beating up people in public or whatever. He's not really the profile that the Department of Corrections is looking for the classic dangerous person. Okay, so I don't see him as a candidate at all for any kind of high security or any kind of gen pop situation where he's going to be around, like, say, murderers and, let's say, gang members and stuff like that. I think it's almost guaranteed that if California has any hospital facilities that are, prison hospitals, to the extent that it can be sort of finagled, because, here's something that's interesting. The courts cannot directly tell the corrections exactly how to house people. Corrections is independently in charge of assessing each prisoner's security risks, their profile, and to put them in the place that's going to be the less risk for everybody. Okay, so basically the Department of Corrections is really in charge of Danny Masterson at this point. The judge has no power. The judge can just set the term of the sentence. At this point, the Department of Corrections now, they have to really look at Danny Masterson as a person, kind of assess his level of danger to others, how violent is he, and I'm pretty sure he'll end up either in a hospital facility because of his alcohol issues, his alcohol withdrawal issues. And so it may start as, let's say, and then later, because he'll be dealing with his alcohol withdrawal, inevitably there's going to come up anxiety and insomnia. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that at some point he'll do the right thing and he'll get a psych assessment, as he goes through his alcohol withdrawal, and later he'll become a chronic, like, say, anxiety or insomnia, whatever. And I'm sure that to the extent it's possible, he'll try to get, and I think he probably will get, because he's a high profile prisoner, probably will get something like a hospital care, at least for a while, so that he'll be serving his prison time, but in I would say a very relatively comfortable and not a dangerous setting. So I don't expect him to go to Gen Pop or go to any high security kind of prison. I do not expect that. And I know a lot of people are talking about that, but it just doesn't make sense. When you have a high profile person who's connected in California politically and all that, the Department of Corrections is gonna take care of him. They may make it seem publicly like he's getting treated very sternly and very, given like a hard treatment, whatever. But they're gonna be careful. They're not gonna screw up. Okay. And so even if he doesn't end up in a hospital setting, which I do expect, actually, he probably would end up, I think, in a lower security prison with other sex offenders that are also, let's say, vulnerable to, to being abused by, let's say, more hardcore prisoners. Okay, so yeah, so that's basically my, that's basically my expectation. I think, you know, I think he deserves to be in prison, but I think that the Department of Corrections is going to take into account the whole picture. That he's not really a dangerous person, really. I mean, he's a dangerous person when he's drinking with women. Maybe when he was younger, I think he's married now. I think he's kind of calmed down a little bit. But there was a time when he was dangerous in certain situations. But generally speaking, for the purposes of prison, I don't think he's dangerous. And I think he's going to be sort of classified as a low security, but he's low security in terms of his danger to others. But I think high security, high risk in terms of what other people could do to him. So I think he'll end up probably in a relatively low security prison, but around other sex offenders who are kind of like compatible with him, basically. And basically, he'll just have to keep a low profile. And my expectation is he'll also get a lot of medical attention. So yeah, bottom line is when you have a lot of money and you're connected politically, you're going to get a softer treatment in prison, and that's just the way of the world. And I've seen it too many times. And also, like even Donald Trump, like say in Georgia, a lot of people are just keep talking and talking about, oh, Donald Trump's going to be in prison. I guarantee you, even if the letter of the law in Georgia says that Donald Trump has to be in prison, I guarantee you, because he's a president, okay, that is such an unprecedented situation that new law would be made basically for him, because he's such a unique person that he would never see a day of prison. And also the way the politics is going these days, I'm pretty sure there'll be a Republican president anyway, so Donald Trump will probably get pardoned by the time all the dust settles. Even if he's not president, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, as far as Danny Masterson goes, definitely narcissistic issues. Okay, I don't know if he's falls right into the box of NPD, but I can see his form of alcohol abuse as having kind of a narcissistic pattern, in the sense that it's fundamentally down there in that narcissistic place for me, where people have a lot of difficulty accepting and dealing with and carrying discomfort in basic life. And so they use either ways of thinking or substances to kind of avoid discomfort and really live a life where they just never learn to adapt to the uncomfortable aspects of living, and how that can cause like serious kind of problems in the way we process information and the way we perceive reality, but also in behavior. And in this case, I think his sexuality was never integrated into himself. And so, he ended up, really committing crimes that I think even in his heart, I don't think he really would have wanted to commit those crimes if he could just go back and do it all over again. But the bottom line is that, his sexuality has not been integrated. And I do think he deserves a prison sentence, but I think because of his high profile status, I think he's going to get treated pretty softly by the California Department of Corrections. So that's my analysis, my prediction. I could be wrong, but that's what I expect. I do not expect him in Gen Pop with hardcore criminals. I absolutely don't expect that. And I think probably his first weeks in prison will probably be in a hospital setting. So that's my analysis, and wishing everybody the best. And thanks for watching.